Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world right now. It's Friday afternoon, 5 o'clock New York time, and that means it's time for the Happy Hour Live webcast from whiskeycast.com. I'm Mark Gillespie in the WhiskyCast studio, and we've got a couple of fun guests coming up in just a minute here. I wanted to thank everybody who responded to our request for people to help us beta test this little project we're working on that I really can't talk about publicly yet, but we're still looking for volunteers. If you're interested, let us know, because we are beta testing a new project here, and we will hopefully be ready to unveil it in the next couple, 3 weeks. We already have a comment from Watchman 999 in Calgary. Sipping on an Old Forester 1920 this afternoon. Sunny and warm in Calgary, but give it 15 minutes. Our pal Juan Cruz. Good afternoon, everyone. Back on this side of the pond. He was over in the UK for a while. Just water today. I'll hope you all have a good weekend right now. Tyrone Cote, hello from a spooky Halifax, Nova Scotia. The Halloween decorations are up and he's ready for a dram. Let's go ahead and bring in our guests right now. Ashok Chokalingam and Raj Sabharwal. Ashok, of course, is the head distiller and in charge of international sales for Amrut, and Raj is the U.S. importer for Amrut. Good afternoon, guys. How are you today?
Good afternoon, Mark. How are you? I'm fine, thanks.
Great, Mark. Great to be here with you.
Thank you for both joining us today. And Ashok, you're in Louisville right now. Explain what you're doing in Louisville.
I think everyone knows what you're doing. I came to meet a couple of distillery friends in Kentucky, and then also just trying to source some barrels as well. And that's why I'm here for.
And Raj, where are you right now?
I'm actually surprisingly at home. I'm in Durham, North Carolina, and for a day, and then next week I'm spending the whole week with Ashok, touring across the eastern part of the U.S.
We were talking beforehand, and you pointed out that 2004 was when the first Amrut single malt was bottled. It is hard to believe that it has been almost 20 years since Amrut bottled that first single malt, way back when. You were around back then. Tell us about that time, Ashok, when you and the Jagdale family were making that decision to get into single malt and bottling it.
It's a historic journey, Mark, and even I can't believe that I completed 18 years of my working with Amrut this February. It is incredible journey because we have made that bold decision of no one has tried to do that from India, although we are not the biggest distillery in India, not the oldest, but still I think we had the courage to go to the global market with a single malt whiskey from India. I think looking back to all the struggles that we have gone through and where we are now, it is incredible.
Raj, well, before we go to there, Raj, explain just how you became involved with Amrut in the first place all those years ago as the one to bring it to the United States.
2000, I think it was either 2008 or 2009. I had moved back to the U.S. My wife's American. As most people know, I'm Canadian, grew up in Canada. And my friends, business partners in Canada called me and said, hey, we have this Indian whiskey that we're importing into Canada and they're interested in the U.S. And my first reaction was, Indian whiskey? There's no good Indian whiskey. What are you talking about? Because every time I'd gone to India and my cousins would feed us whiskey, it wasn't what we were used to as whiskey. But I went up to Calgary, met with Bill and Jane, tried Amrut, was very impressed. Then I got on a plane and flew to London to meet Ashok and had dinner with him and tried to convince him that I knew what I was doing and see if he would have confidence in me to be the U.S. importer. So the rest, as they say, is history. We, as you know, Mark, we struggled for about a year fighting the TTB, trying to get approval, trying to convince them that a single malt was a legitimate product and that this was a legitimate, after going through lab testing and everything else, and their first reaction was that we could call it a straight malt whiskey. And I was like, what the hell is a straight malt whiskey? The consumers are not going to buy that. So we fought the fight, and you and John Hansel helped us with that, and obviously the rest, as they say, we've moved on from there. So
we should explain the difficulty you were having was because back in those days, there weren't many world single malts, were there, Ashok?
No, we were. I was just like thinking back. I think probably nobody was trying to export it to the US market at that point in time. So the world whiskey single malt category was literally nothing, maybe like 2 or 3 players at the time. I think we paved the way for many of the distilleries to, travel easy going forward. I just wanted to take this moment to thank you, and then of course John Hansel, because you did it with a good intention of what it is. And then in those days there was no rules where PTB didn't have a section for world whiskey when it comes to single malt. So it was a real struggle. As Raj explained, it took like a little over a year to get the cola done. So it was amazing.
All I did was write a letter, so I'm not going to take any credit for it. Our pal Greg Serafian in Paris says he thought he'd been tasting them since 2009, and then recalled, nope, it was when he met Neil Jagdale, resting in peace, in Paris at 2007 at Whiskey Live Paris. Watchman 99 in Calgary has a general question. The majority are no age statement. Can Ashok comment on that and whether age statements can be deciphered like Kavalan does? I'm looking at this Amrut Atma that Raj brought in, and it's got the dates on there. It was distilled in January of 2016 and bottled in June of 2021, which makes it about 5.5 years old. Part of that is the rapid maturation that happens in Bangalore, right?
Yeah, the issue is this. Now, when I basically say my whiskey is aged for 5 years and then go onto the shelf, let's say the retail price of the product is $60 US. The average consumer walking into the store cannot understand why a 5-year-old whiskey is costing $60 or $65 unless somebody is there to explain to them. The whiskey geeks or the people who are really following single malts can understand that, but a general public cannot. And that's the reason why we are not in a position of taking that risk of putting an age statement where it can backfire us. And that's the reason why we don't do it for a normal core products. However, on a special single cask bottlings like what you have on hand now, everything is there. From the date of distillation, number of bottles, and everything.
Let's explain how fast whiskey matures in Bangalore. Your oldest bottlings are basically no more than really 10 years old, right?
The oldest we have bottled is 12 years old so far. The Greedy Angels, as the name explains, the quantum of whiskey that you lose for maturation loss. Our average maturation loss, Angel share, is running between 10 and 12% a year based on where the particular cask is sitting in the warehouse. So we have done a lot of studies and then concluded that 1 year of maturation in Bangalore can achieve a profile par with 3 to 4 year old in Scotland.
And Stephen Brown wants to know, what is your Angels share? And the easy answer is a lot.
Exactly. It's a lot. As I said, it can be 10 to 12%. Depends on where the cask is sitting in the warehouse.
Tyrone Cote wants to know what percentage of Amrut is consumed in India and who's the biggest competition domestically for you. We've had this discussion before in that the Indian market isn't as mature when it comes to whiskeys yet and hasn't really developed a taste for single malt, but that is changing, right?
I think like any other whiskey market in the world where consumers basically migrate from blended whiskey to premium blends to single malt, I think we are at the position in India where it's a slight tip off between premium blend to single malt. People understand now better than what it was before. At the moment, we are selling, I think, 50-50, 50% international and 50% India of what we can produce and supply. With regards to the competition, if you look at the global market, we are really far ahead of everybody in terms of the quantum that what we sell. In the domestic market, I'm in a situation where I think every distillery wanted to be there. Everything is sold. Everything, in fact, pre-sold and allocated. I don't have enough quantity to basically sell. So even we had an expansion program 4 years ago, and then that is coming of age from next year, and that is also pre-sold. So that's what the situation is now.
Raj, what are the strongest domestic markets in the U.S. for Amrut?
Good question. Our biggest markets for Amrut in the U.S. are, and this is in no particular order, California, Texas, New Jersey, New York, Georgia. Those would be probably the top 5 markets.
David Thompson wants to know where you're getting your malted barley from. Some of it is Indian barley, correct?
I would say about 75% of the barley is homegrown, which is unpeated. The only barley that we import is a peated barley from Scotland. India being a tropical country, we don't have a peat, and that's the reason why we import. Otherwise, there is no need to import any barley at all, because we have a huge barley growing region in the north of India, which produces a fantastic quality.
And just to clarify that, it's also the Indian barley is a 6-row barley rather than the traditional 2-row barley. So you're getting a lower yield, but a more richer distillate coming out of it.
John Kalinowski wants to know about your casks. Does the Bangalore climate work better with certain woods, and are Oloroso sherry butts even possible to use? I think so, right?
I think we work with almost every kind of barrels that you can think of. What you have to be careful about in Bangalore is for how long you mature in what kind of barrel. You got to particularly watch for the length of maturation. What a fantastic whiskey aged for 6 years can be absolutely horrible in 6.5 years old. So it quickly can turn into a worst whiskey from a good whiskey. So that's what you have to be careful about.
Question from Chris Ratcliffe. Do people in bar sales in India value Indian whiskey and seek out the local whiskeys, or do they prefer imported whiskeys still, despite the high tariffs?
In the past, it was imported whiskey, especially in a high-end bar. And now the Indian single malts are recognized very well by the consumers in India. I would think now the sales of domestically produced malt whiskies are up in the rise in the bar area. So much better now than what it was.
Chris Ratcliffe wants to also know if whiskey tourism has come to the Indian whiskey industry yet. Are you getting a lot of visitors at the distillery in Bangalore?
Right. So I think Paul John has taken a credit for creating a good visitor center in Goa. The thing is, the excise policies or alcoholic policy of different states in India is different. There are some states where it is very easy to work with, and some states it is very difficult to work with. Where Paul John is located in the state of Goa, the state is more dependent on tourists for their exchequer and revenue. So they have a much more open-minded policy when it comes to alcohol as compared to the state that where we are in, where it is really, really rigid rules, and then very difficult to, for example, even get somebody into the distillery and then offer them a sample to taste, which is illegal. Whereas in Goa, the government has given a permission to them to operate an on-premise bar, as well as were able to sell some. So I think our state has to basically upgrade that. Until that happens, I cannot have really a proper visitor center where we invite basically consumers to walk in and pay for a tour and then sample the whiskeys. At the moment, we do it on a private basis. It's not a public tour as yet. But I think more going forward, this will change, where whiskey tourism will start in India for sure. It's a matter of time.
Tyrankar T wants to know if the significant Indian diaspora around the world creates export demand for you, for example, in the UK. And what are your largest markets in Europe?
It was not the case before, but it is now. The ethnic minorities of India who lives in different parts of Europe are proud of what the Indian distilleries are doing, and they give a big thumbs up now than what it was when we started.
And Watchman 999 wants to know about your growth plans. You told us about the expansion that's coming online that you've been doing. What are your growth plans to continue to grow the distillery?
I think where we are in terms of the location of the distillery, in my opinion, we hit the ceiling now already with regards to supply and demand. To give you an idea, we are distilling close to 1 million liters at a barrel strength, and that's it. Now, I cannot do any more expansion program in the place where we are. The only option left for us is to build another distillery in another location. At Amrut, we hit the ceiling.
Any idea when that might happen, or will it happen?
It can happen. It's all depends on many external factors, which is going to govern the trade of alcohol in India. We are just basically waiting to get some clarity on that. Probably, I think by the end of this year, we'll have some idea where we are heading towards. At the moment, we do have a plan to build another distillery, but this all depends on the macroeconomic policy of the government of India, where we are waiting for the results of free trade agreement between the UK and India, and then how it basically going to shape the whiskey industry in India.
Raj, you picked this single cask Atma that I'm drinking right now. Tell us about what goes into picking the single casks that you bring into the U.S.
Which one is that, Mark? Does it say?
That's the Fino Sherry from last year.
Oh yeah, that was beautiful. So
it is.
Either when I was at the distillery in end of September, so we tasted a number of barrel samples and picked about 5 for next year. And because of COVID, I wasn't able to travel to Amrut for 2 years, but last year Ashok had managed to send me some barrel samples, and I went through there. And in fact, the Fino, Mark, that you have, I tasted 5 different Fino samples and selected this one, which I thought was brilliant. But each of the Atmas are our name for the single cask that we select for the U.S. market. And you'll see it right on there. It has the date of distillation, the date of bottling, as well as the number of bottles. And Atma is always bottled at 56.5%. And again, that's because of regulations in Karnataka, where Bangalore is. If you wanted to change that, you'd have to file for a new label and pay, I think it's about $1,500, Ashok, to get a new label registered. So we had to select what strength we were going to bottle it at going forward and stick with that.
Even though the federal limit in India is 50% ABV, right?
For domestic sales only.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can export up to 62.8, which is the peated cask strength comes in at that.
Tell me about the relationship between, and I'm going to put you both on the spot here, the relationship between distiller and importer, because Raj, I know you could probably sell everything Ashok makes if he was willing to send it to you. And Ashok, I know you have to deal with a global marketplace. Tell me about that relationship. How do you deal with it in terms of trying to figure out which comes to the U.S., which stays in Europe, and how do you do that?
I think we have a good understanding. For both Raj and Bill and Jane, myself, one thing is very clear. We don't want to bottle something with a compromise and send it to the market. We would rather take a sales loss. And precisely, I'm glad that you brought this subject in. I wrote an email to Raj, Bill, and Jane 2 weeks ago. I'm suspending bottling of Amrut single malt from now until February for the export market because I don't have enough of stock, and I will have a matured stock to my satisfaction coming of age only in February. Until the time, I'm not going to bottle it. So they were disappointed, but they understood the real problem on hand, and they said, okay, we'll just ration up the stock to where it is really required to spread across, and then we will wait. So this is like an example. And then with regards to the stock allocation, I think I've been very fair to them. For example, that Pinot, we haven't bottled for anybody else, just for the US market. As he said, we have only 5 barrels of Pinot when we bought, and then the first single cask was bottled for the US. So I think it's a good understanding on either side is what required, and then especially you got to stay together during the turbulent times.
Yeah, and if I could just go back, I mean, back when we first started, the requirements with the TTB that we had to send actual full bottle samples to the lab for testing, which meant that there was a lot of limited releases that Amrut was releasing that we could not bring into the U.S. market because obviously it was limited and we couldn't get a bottle sent here to go lab testing. So in the initial years, we missed out on a lot of things like Spectrum 5, for example, and some other ones. That's changed now. Now we can bring in pretty much anything. And so we have more leeway on things. But as Ashok said, we just have to manage it. We probably speak a couple times a month at least to find out what's going on, what's happening. And, Neil Jagdal, who, the grandfather of Indian single malt whiskey, always said that quality before quantity. And it's great to see that Neil's son and son-in-law and Ashok are sticking by that. And we respect that because we certainly don't want to have anything come into the market that isn't quality and is going to result in the reputation of us and reputation of Amrut being sullied.
Chris Ratcliffe has a good question. Given the huge range of climates, would an Amrut distillery in North India give a different character or further south in Kerala?
Good question, Chris. The federal nature of the country is so complicated that I can easily ship a couple of barrels of whiskey to you in the US or wherever you live rather than to the north of India. So, for example, for you to get a distillery license in the northern Indian state and then move the barrels is so difficult. And that's the reason why, for example, we have a brand called Amrut Two Continents, where initially the whiskey was aged in India, and then I have moved the barrel to the cooler climate in Europe, and then matured further and bottled it, which is much more easier than moving the barrel to a cooler climate in the north of India. So that's what the problem is.
But also, if you look at the the other Indian single malts that are in the U.S. market and the European markets, they all have different styles and characters. Paul John in Goa is affected by the climate in Goa, which is more humidity. You're not going to get the high alcohol strengths that you get out of Amrut, because Bangalore has lower humidity and more heat, at times. So just like in Scotland, where different regions, you get different styles of whiskey, India is the same.
We should talk about the different regions, because this is the Needle, your other label, Single Malts of India, that's your first independent bottling. This one came out last year, and you're getting ready to release another one. Tell us about those different regions and what they offer whiskies, Ashok.
Mark, so when I looked at the regions in Scotland, what we have realized that region, based on the topography, was scripted in ancient Tamil text in India in 300 BC. And that basically gave me a lot of inspiration to bank on. And then the bottle that you shown, the Naidal, I have first tasted that single malt about 8-9 years ago when Neil was alive. I told Neil that I really like that whiskey, and it is fit to bottle it as a single malt, provided if we can tweak few things on maturation. And that's exactly what I did last year. So I bought partly matured single malt from a coastal region in India. It basically totally a different climatic condition than where Amrut is located, high humid, hot, and then the warehouse is closer to the sea. So that basically gave a lot of influence on this single malt, the Naidal, which is a peated single malt. So then I bought that spread and then further aged to the style that we wanted in Bangalore, and then bottled it. So the next one is going to be coming from another region, totally a different climatic condition. And then that basically, what Raj shows is called Kurinji, single malts of India. It's very floral than Amrut. Because of climatic condition in Bangalore, our whiskey will not be floral, but that one is extremely floral.
And then will you be bottling from the other three regions as well?
I'm trying to source. Definitely, there is another one for sure. But at the moment, there is no distillery in the desert region in India. So probably I had to skip that.
Greg Serafi in Whiskey Life Paris, he was very impressed with the triple distilled Triparva. Will you do that again, or was it just a one-off?
No, we have just released the second release of Triparva, which is a triple distill. I think it's the first triple distill single malt from Asian region rather than India. So the first release was about 4 years ago, and then we have done the second release now. I think this will continue on a regular interval, but not every year.
And Whiskey Canuck in Montreal enjoyed the Kadambam release from a few years ago and wants to see it made again. What are your guiding principles for deciding what gets made a second time or not?
It depends on the success of the brand in terms of the consumer liking. And then, I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, we have 40 different SKUs of single malt in our portfolio. With the distillery, which started its single malt operation 18 years ago, you have 40 different brands. I really do not want to flood the market with so many brands at the same point in time. So our strategy is we will bring in all the limited editions in a rotational basis. So Kadambam was sold out, and it will not be bottled for another 3 or 4 years. We got in Spectrum this year, and then we will have, for example, single malt rye next year. So we just basically rotate it. Kadambam will be produced again, but probably not immediately.
When you talk about Spectrum, I loved the poster from a couple of years ago with you dressed up as James Bond with the 004 or 002 sign on. That was just absolutely hilarious knowing you. Just fun to watch. Raj is cracking up laughing too at this.
Well, there was a for last year's release. There was a video where the Ashoks are acting as James Bond, but I think for a number of reasons, that's the last time we'll see that.
Trademark reasons, probably, right?
No comment, Mark.
Okay, yeah, we don't want to go there. Yeah, the Bond folks have some very good lawyers. Let's put it that way. Tell me about the difference between the single malt whiskey that you're making and the Indian style whiskey that you also make at the distillery.
Okay, so in the past, majority of the Indian blended whiskeys were made with neutral alcohol produced from molasses and then blended with aged malt and caramelized, etc. I think the market has evolved, so do the producers. And now there are more grain distilleries in India. Everyone is producing grain for both ethanol as well as potable spirit. So now the majority of the whiskeys, the blended whiskeys, are produced from grain spirit, and then some are aged, some are not aged, and then blended with the matured malt whiskey. I think it's a right progress in the right direction. Going forward, it will mature. For example, we have a blended whiskey brand called Macintosh Silver Edition. I would challenge many of the whiskey drinkers to give it as a blind and identify where it comes from. I bet majority of them will struggle because it's so difficult to differentiate that with a standard Scotch blended whiskies, for example. So we have, as a country, we have come up a long way. Going forward, it is going to be better for sure.
Does that help you in the terms of the export market? Because I know there's been this dispute with other countries in the European Union over the years about the molasses-based spirit not really being considered as whiskey outside of India and not being able to be called whiskey. Now that you're producing more grain-based whiskey, does that help with the export market?
It will help the export market, but still we have one problem which is unaddressed, which is the aging requirement. So as I said before, 1 year of aging in India give me a profile par with 3 to 4 years in Scotland. So having said that, I cannot mature the grain for 3 years and compete with Scotch blends, for example, which is you can pick it up in the shelf for 10 pounds a bottle in the UK, where the excise duty and VAT alone on that bottle will be a little over 8 pounds. So what you left with is about close to 2 pounds a bottle, which has to be shared across the chain, the producer's margin, the supermarket which sells its margin, or the retailer. So it will be very, very difficult for us to compete with that price point with the mass-produced brands in Europe. I think unless that aging criteria is relaxed, it will be very difficult for the Indian distillers to compete in the European Union market.
Whiskey Canuck says that amalgam is labeled as a blended malt, and the traditional meaning of that is that it combines whiskeys from different distilleries. Is that the case for this one, or is it all Amrut?
No, Amrut Amalgam is a proper blended malt whiskey where it is aged for a minimum period of 3 years and above. And it's a blend of single malt whiskeys produced in India and Scotland.
Tell us about the two continents expression. We had some comments about that one earlier. That's where you distill in India and mature in India for a period of time and then take it to Europe to an undisclosed location to mature it for the rest of the time. Are you still producing that one?
Yes, I'm glad that you opened this topic. The fourth release of Two Continents is going to be, I think we haven't revealed to anybody yet. I'm happy to share it with WhiskyCast and the fans of WhiskyCast. It's going to be in the market in the next couple of months. As we speak, we are just bottling that. the idea is just we wanted to experiment how our whiskey behaves when you try to mature it further in a colder climate, and that's the reason why we initially matured our single malt for a little over 3-4 years in India, Bangalore, and then shipped the barrels to, as you said, an undisclosed location in Europe, and then matured it for another 3 or 4 years. Although I cannot claim the age matured in the other part, but all I can tell is the next release of Two Continent is the oldest that we have ever done. The total age of that whiskey is close to 10 years, almost 6 years in Europe, 4 years in Bangalore. Put together is 10 years. Is an incredible whiskey, which is going to be a treat for everyone.
Will the U.S. be getting it, Raj?
Yes, we're getting 200 cases. That's our allocation. So 1,200 bottles.
That's all?
That's all. And
of course.
That's a big chunk of what was made, right?
Yeah.
That's at least a third of what the total production.
Question from Watchman 999, and this reflects back to a discussion we had before we got started on the show, before we went live. He wants to know how the official rules in India compare to Japan's new ones and to other established jurisdictions. He says Canada when it comes to making single malt whiskey.
Okay. All over the world, it is a very complicated question. As he rightly said, if I remember, in Canada, you can add a 9% of anything edible into the whiskey and still can call it as a whiskey. In India, we are not allowed to add any edible stuff into the whiskey, barring the caramel coloring. Now, the rules and regulations are upgraded where whiskey has to be made from cereal wort, etc. But still, we are not there yet. But working our way up in tightening the rules and regulations, now we have a federal agency which basically monitors and then set up the rules on different alcoholic products, which is basically produced in India. So it's complicated, but I think we are evolving.
But it seems very simple compared to the rules, say, in the U.S. and Scotland.
Sorry, Mark, say again?
It seems very simple compared to the rules in the U.S. and Scotland.
Yeah, see, U.S. Is the one country that I really love the way the rules and regulations are formulated, where you have a scope for different kinds of whiskey that you can produce and sell it. In India, it is not as simple as it is. For example, you have a straight malt whiskey, you have a blended whiskey, you have a flavored whiskey. All these categories exist here. But in our case, it's not. It's like only one category, whiskey, blended, and single malt. And that's it. So I think we have to upgrade ourselves like what TTP does in terms of bringing different subclasses where you would be able to officially bottle and sell and then tell the consumers what it is.
Let's go back to the Two Continents question. Whiskey Canuck has the real question. Is Canada getting any?
Definitely they are getting, but only to the province of Alberta, unfortunately, and a little bit in British Columbia. Is the only two provinces.
But I know there are stores in Alberta that will ship.
I don't know whether it is illegal or not, but
It's not legal, but they will ship.
Yeah.
They will ship.
Yeah.
They will do it anyway. So,
yeah.
But once again, we don't know that to be official. That's just hearsay, of course. Got to keep honest with the lawyers. Guys, where do you see the whiskey market going in the next year or two? We've been just going through years and years of growth, and there has to be a contraction coming at some point.
Yeah, Mark, we were talking about this before the show started, and I think both Ashok and I expressed our opinions that we think that there's going to be correction in probably 2020, late 2023, early 2024. I think that we can't continue at the pace it is. And you asked me, did I see it first happening in Scotland or somewhere else or the U.S.? And I think I first see it happening in the U.S. I think there's too many distilleries making bourbon. The prices are getting out of control for 2, 3, 4-year-old bourbons. And I think there's going to be a consumer outcry of that, or a consumer fatigue at having to pay those prices for it. And I suspect that a number of new distilleries in the U.S. will end up shutting down and not being operating just because they're trying to accelerate or move too quickly into the market.
Ashok, your take.
What I have seen over the last 18 years is the whiskey market go for a boom followed by a bust, where the prices crash down. Everybody will basically cut down the production, and I think all the boom has to be followed by a bust. So some point in time, it will crash.
Yeah, the only thing that scares me but concerns me is that I think that consumers are getting wiser and seeing that, and that certainly when we see a downturn and hopefully prices will come lower based on basic economics, that when they're lower, people will start buying those and then driving the prices up again, and so creating a false market. So there's different fundamentals they're asking. I mean, we know that alcohol is, for all intents and purposes, recession-proof or inflation-proof. People will continue to drink. They might go down to a lower level, but they're going to continue to drink.
Raj, you work with whiskeys from all over the world in your import business. Where do you see the strongest growth coming in terms of world whiskeys?
I still think that there's a lot to come from India. I think India is, in a situation where Japan was maybe 10 or 12 years ago. So it's just at the cusp of breaking out into the market. I'm looking at China, where there's now 3 distilleries. So let's see what comes out of there. There's a lot happening in Australia still, and I think that there's a couple of distilleries who have figured out the right way to.
Raj, you're freezing up, and
approach
Ashok,
that you can't. Sorry, in Australia you can't. Outside of Australia, you
Raj,
can't get
you
the same
froze
prices.
up there for that pretty much most of that entire answer. Could you repeat it, please?
Sure. I was just saying that there's a lot happening in Australia as well, and I think that some of the Australian distilleries, Starward, for example, has taken the right approach, and other distilleries in Australia have to realize that the prices that they sell products for in Australia, you can't get the same prices in the foreign markets, international markets. So they have to take a different approach. And I'm also seeing a lot happening in New Zealand. So I think there's, look south. There's a lot going on there, and I think there's a lot of interesting things going on.
I would echo the Australia and New Zealand comments. The climate down there is so close to Scotland that if they can get past the issues of being able to produce in enough bulk and enough scale to be able to supply an export market, they're going to do very, very well.
Absolutely. Well, Mark, you and I both had the privilege of trying Wahiki whiskey, peated whiskeys from New Zealand, which were just incredible, because using New Zealand peat, which is totally different than what you find in the north, and the whiskeys that came out of there were just phenomenal.
Comment from Greg on the boom right now, and the boom and bust. The boom almost everywhere of new distilleries, but as many are craft and boutique, it'll be difficult for them to supply all the potential demand. That is the problem with the startup, is just being able to meet that demand without facing the temptation to bottle whiskey too early just to try to get it on the market and try to supply that demand. It's almost it's a very difficult choice these startup distilleries have to make.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, you look at some of the new distilleries in Scotland, which are, not afraid to release just over 3-year-old whiskey. So we're seeing a lot of them doing that, rather than trying to supplant their cash flow by making vodka and gin and other things there. They want to stick true to what they're making, but they're releasing younger whiskeys, which are damn good. And it just goes to show you that, whiskey doesn't have to be 10, 12, 15, 20 years to be good.
We do have a question for you from Greg Ashok. He loves the Madeira finish and wants to know if you're going to release another one anytime soon.
Year. Next year. The Madeira is, in the meantime, what we have done is we have bottled a fantastic Madeira cask, single cask Atma for the US. And then we have bottled one for France also. However, Madeira finish as a general product is going to come next year.
Any other new releases coming in the next few months that we need to know about besides the ones we've already talked about?
Well, our latest Atma, which is, we have a little bit of it left, is a Marsala cask, which is just fantastic. You can see that I've enjoyed a little bit of it, but and Mark, I'll make sure you get a sample of it. But
okay, thank you.
So coming up, we have another single cask that is currently available in the U.S. From Amrut, and then the next Atma coming in is the Sauterne cask, followed by the Madeira cask, as Ashok said, and two continents that I already talked about. Trying to think what else is coming in. Ashok, what else is on its way?
Yeah, it's we have other one called Little Greedy Angels.
Oh yeah,
which is 8 years old. It's 100% peated in India with the Indian 6-row barley, as opposed to bring the imported Scottish barley. So that is only 1,000 bottles we have made. So of course, unfortunately, it's going to be allocated to every country. If I remember, the USA is getting 180 bottles or something like that. I can't even remember that. So.
Well, guys, it's been great to talk to both of you and to reconnect. I mean, I saw you, Ashok, 2 weeks ago in London, and you guys were just, there was a big crowd around your stand the entire time at the Whisky Show.
The Whisky Show was very, very busy. It was absolute non-stop show for the 3 days, and constantly invaded by people on a continuous basis. Even there was no moment of a brief absence. Continuously people were coming, and I think well attended. It was a very good show.
Well, guys, thank you for doing this. We've wasted 50 minutes of your time that you'll never get back. It's good to talk to both of you. Ashok Chokalingam and Raj Sabharwal from Glass Revolution Imports. Guys, thanks for doing this.
Thank you,
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone, for watching and tuning in.
Thanks for everyone.
Thank you for watching. No show the next week because I will be traveling. I'll be in Ireland next week and on the road, and won't be able to do the show, but we'll be back in a couple of weeks. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other, and we'll talk again soon. Good night, all.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.